Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining, and welcome to our next edition of Trade Business News webinars. I'm extremely happy to introduce our guest today, but before we get to that, I'd just like to quickly run through the agenda we're going to be following today. We're going to be looking at, as mentioned, how to bulletproof your business against technological disruption. I believe the information that Harry's going to present to us is going to be very relevant towards you as well as your business and company going forward. So before we conduct that, I would like to ask we want to make this as interactive as possible. So please ask questions, and how you would be doing that, if you have logged on the bottom right-hand side of message bar, there will be a indicator that says type message. I've just quickly said hello to everybody. So please feel free to ask any questions. Harry will answer them at the end of his presentation. And just for interest's sake, where's everybody from today? I'm sitting in sunny Cape Town. So please, it'd be great to see where everybody's from. Sharon, hello. Sharon has just sort of said she's applying on. And Sean also there. Okay, great. Now, while we have this going, I'd like to introduce and just give a bit of background about our presenter today, Harry Welby-Cook. Harry is an entrepreneur, a professional speaker, and a leading business executive coach. He's also the South African co-master licensee of the largest business coaching company in the world, Action Coach. Now, Harry has also appeared in countless business publications. He's been interviewed on television, on radio. He's a regular columnist for Entrepreneur Magazine, Destiny Magazine, and Fin24, to name just a few. I'd like to thank him from his side for presenting this very relevant information. And also at the end, I shall provide contact details for if you would like to interact with Harry and make use of his services. So without further ado, I'm going to let Harry take the steer. And thanks, Harry. Welcome.
Yeah, thanks very much, Peter. Good to be here. And to everybody either joining us live today or that might be listening to this as a recording. And I think, before we get into the topic, so to speak, I think it's just important to understand that what we'll go through today is very practical. I'm going to maybe dispel some of the myths that you keep hearing, but what we focus on at Action Coach is really working with entrepreneurs to run more successful, more profitable, more sustainable businesses. Because even some of the disruptive examples we might use today, one of which being Elon Musk. We love Elon, we love to claim him as our own as a South African, but he's looking to send people to Mars, as is Jeff Bezos from Amazon, and there's a bit of a Mars race going on at the moment. So we're looking to send people to Mars, yet still nowhere in the world can you go anywhere to learn how to run a business. And a friend of mine, he lectures on an MBA program in entrepreneurship, and he says, well, you can come and do the MBA in entrepreneurship. Well, a couple of challenges. First, it's an 18-month full-time program. And I know very few, if any, entrepreneurs that can actually take 18 months off their business to go study. And what they've done is use a lot of the companies we'll talk about today as examples on how to run a business. Well, that still doesn't really impact me in what I'm trying to do and how I go about running my business. And all of us go into business because we've got either a skill or a passion for a product or a service. So a chef, when they're tired of working for somebody else opens a restaurant. A plumber goes into a plumbing business. IT guys open IT businesses. And even our most educated professionals, like doctors, for example, will go into medical private practice. We can be as skilled in the service or the product as we want. It's the overall skills that we require to make a success of anything. And I think as we go through the lessons today and how to bulletproof your business from that technological disruption, it's the importance of understanding your part in the journey in how we go through that and focusing on the right thing. And Peter, I'll ask you every now and again just to go through to the next slides as we talk about the different concepts. So unless you want me to show it on my side, it's up to you. But go through to the slide then. So disruptive technology is becoming a little bit of a buzzword. And if you have a BSc, which a lot of entrepreneurs do, they got their bachelor's in behind the shop counter. Yeah, I heard that from a businessman one day. He's got a BSc in entrepreneurship because he grew up behind the shop counter. Or we were born BC, and a lot of entrepreneurs were born BC, before computers. These buzzwords sound like a minefield. We've got augmented reality, artificial reality, disruptive technology, the Internet of Things, and it's just over and over this bombardment of stuff that we're still sometimes trying to get the hang on the basic level of technology. So it's to understand, where does this fit in, if at all? And how do you prep yourself to really be equipped to deal with it? Because a lot of the technological advancements that are coming, we fortunately not even aware of, I think, because if we did know what was coming, it would scare the hell out of us. And a big concern of a lot of the changes that are coming is that it does beg the question, what will humans do as we create these technologies that will drive a lot more of the success? So if we look at the next slide and we look at some of the world's largest kind of businesses, and specifically the unicorns, as they call them, the billion-dollar companies that are being created around the world that are in that IT space. So if you put the next slide up there, Peter, that'll be great. You'll see some regular kind of brands there that we understand. You'll see there's Airbnb, there's Uber, there's Pinterest, and we're seeing a dominating environment being created both in the Americas as well as China. 10, 15 years ago, Europe, parts of Asia played a much bigger role, but those big unicorns are starting to dominate very much in North America, in the United States, as well as some of the big up-and-coming tech companies in China. And how does that even play into our industry? If you look at the different categories that they play in, big data, e-commerce, obviously taking big strides into the space, and then software being the driver. And we've seen that, with smartphones, with apps, with technology making our lives a lot easier. And if you go to the next slide, you'll hear the typical cliches that we hear of when we talk about disruptive businesses. Uber, the world's largest taxi company, owns no vehicles. Airbnb, the same, biggest in the kind of accommodation space. They own not a hotel at all. And a lot of these companies have morphed into dominating their space, and they get used as the example for entrepreneurs. Now, not necessarily the most politically correct statement that I'm going to make soon, but if you go to the next slide, we're then stuck as the entrepreneur going, where to now? What do I do? If this is what's happening globally, and these are the types of technologies I have to prepare for, the types of technologies that might overrun my business, where does that leave me? And a little bit tongue-in-cheek, but if you look at the next slide, I say, let's call 100% BS on that slide, because it's not comparing apples with apples. We hear the story about those big unicorn companies and where we misplay, but let's look at some of the realities of what goes on in that space and what's happening with companies around the world. So if you look at Uber's loss for the last quarter was $1 billion US. In fact, Uber's collective loss to date is $10 billion US. Now, for many of the businesses and entrepreneurs that will be listening to this, if I gave you $10 billion US, I'm sure you could create a reasonably successful, well-known global company yourself. So fine to use that as the example, but it doesn't make any money. If you look at Elon Musk, the example I used previously, and you look across Tesla, just back to the previous one there, Peter. Tesla, SpaceX, these businesses don't make money either. And if you look at Tesla, electric cars transforming the motor industry, worth billions in paper, the company has collectively lost almost $6.5 billion year to date. They've never made profit. Well, most of us in business listening to this don't have that luxury of the right market, the right amount of venture capitalist funding, the right ability to sell a promise that in Tesla's case for 10 years has never made any money. Uber's not that far behind. And I don't think many of us listening to this will be able to do it. If we bring that locally and we look at the next slide and we look at the South African context, as of this week, the CEO of Takealot was interviewed and he said, we're not breaking even yet. It's been 8 years and that's not unusual. And you look at that and you go, okay, Takealot's becoming the Amazon of South Africa and even Southern Africa. They have a multinational, one of the biggest companies in South Africa, Naspers, as a shareholder. In the last share transaction that Naspers did, they had almost R1 billion that was invested into Takealot to grow the business. They've bought Mr. Delivery because that takes care of a lot of their logistical issues to get the products out. Yet they don't see it as abnormal to not even have broken even. And they are in the digital kind of disruption space. So now I'm the business owner looking at that going, near hell, now I'm confused. People are saying I must transform to that. I'm battling to make ends meet just where I'm at. And now I'm going to be in for potentially a decade of losses. How's that going to kind of work? So if we look at the next slide and we just look at the world's biggest companies still, and obviously this is changing, a lot of those companies are companies that are traditional and have been around for multiple decades. So all of the brands that you see there, you would have seen before. And I always talk about, when I talk about business, is business takes 25 years to be an overnight success. And many of the brands there were around for a lot longer than 25 years before they became an overnight success. It's a little bit different, an emphasis on a little bit different when you start looking at tech companies. We tend to think that the tech companies are instant success stories. Well, there we've seen that that's not the case. Google, Facebook, whilst they dominate today, took years before they got to that place. And generally those even high-tech companies are 12 to 15 years to be an overnight success. And I think that's the first real big point I want to make is give yourself a break, number one, and see this as a long-term focus. No business that is successful around the world was successful in the first year, had the model right in the first year, and just printed money. It doesn't work like that. Those type of businesses don't exist. It is a journey. So if we take it outside of the buzzword of disruptive technology, and we take it into language that has always been around, a business language, a universal language, we can look at the next slide and see that all disruptive technology really is allowing us to innovate, to improve on what we're already doing, to not throw the baby out with the bathwater, but to actually evolve in our organization. And then what that all encapsulates is change. And that's the essence of what you need to do is when you're trying to bulletproof your business. If you're not changing, if you're not evolving with the times, if you're not constantly looking at ways to improve your business and having the time to look ahead, to be creative, to be innovative, to prepare for things that haven't yet happened, then you will be caught almost in no man's land. And that is then a slippery slope to business failure. So if we go to the next slide, you'll see that there is only two options. It is like a switch. It's adapt or die. To succeed today, you have to get used to change. You have to be able to adapt quickly. And even the very successful companies, they've become successful not because they were smarter, not because they came up with a world-class idea. They just adapted a lot quicker. So for the mere mortals out there, take away disruptive technology as a terrible thing that we don't really understand and say, I have to adapt or I will fail. And that's the choice that I make. But what I want to pose as a challenge to everybody today, if we look at the next slide, is, and you might be listening to this as a South African, you might even be outside of South Africa, and it will be as applicable for the country that you operate in, is, are you truly proudly South African? And I think this is my big frustration with where we're at as a country at the moment. Is I wrote an article recently for Black Business Quarterly, and I said that the problem with South Africa is actually South Africans. Because how can we commit to a future? How can we even think about technology and about bulletproofing our business to get to a place in the future when all we're doing is second guessing that future? When all we're doing is buying into the rhetoric of the media, worrying about what our politicians get up to, having a woe is me, the grass is greener on the other side kind of scenario. And I think we really need to look at the next slide and take stock of the fact that we need to stop this nonsense. You cannot build a future you do not see. And it's as simple as that. And technology is just the catalyst to the future. So for you to build a business that's going to be around, even surviving, let alone thriving in the future, you need to really create a little bit of clarity of future, where you're going. What is it that you're looking to get out of your business in the first place? And the head of business at Standard Bank, if we look at the next slide, again this week came up with a couple of key areas that businesses fail. Now it might be quite small on your screen there, but the reasons businesses fail, and you'll notice none of them are because of disruptive technology, is poor planning, access to finance. It's even a bit small on my screen at the moment. Yeah. The passionate, lack of financial expertise, poor stock and cash flow management, that kind of focus, and failure to differentiate. Now, those are the realities that drive either business success or business failure. And you need to get good at each of those. When people say to me, well, lack of funding is an issue in South African business, I say, well, there's a reason it's difficult to get hold of money. There's a reason a lot of the banks have not given you money, and it's because you don't deserve it. You don't really know what it is that you're doing. If most of our businesses, more than 50%, fail in the first 24 months, can you imagine if we did give you the money, what the whole banking system and financial system would look like? So it's around understanding if those are the reasons why businesses fail. I need to get that level of mastery right first. I need to get that level of substance right first, and then I can scale. It's not, let's first get all the other nice to have things and a Google-like Play Office and the best technology that our staff can use, but we haven't actually got money in the bank. We haven't actually got clients that are paying for us. So what you need to look at is the road ahead. On the next slide is, where am I going? Where do I want to take my business? And where do I want to take my life? And how do I build a business to get me there? So it's the same as saying, well, I'd like to go to Kilimanjaro on an off-road African safari trip. Great, good idea. Then you don't get into a vehicle that is a supercar with low-profile tires, hardly any suspension, and definitely no ability to take the bumps of the roads in it, because as you get closer to Kilimanjaro, you will have more of that challenge. So decide where it is that you want to go, and then build the vehicle, which is your business, to get you there. And that vehicle will change as you go along, because it might get a flat tire. It might need to be topped up with fuel. It might have to take a detour because the road has been washed away, or whatever the case may be. But if you know where it is that you're going, you can morph the vehicle on the fly as you get there. And that allows for the flexibility that I think businesses need to succeed. Because if you look at the next slide, our definition of a true business is very simple. It's a commercial, profitable enterprise that works without you. And each of those words, the important ones, have been underlined for a reason. Commercial in that there needs to be viability. Whether you're a technology company or not, whether you're evolving into the technology space or not, if there's no commercial viability, if somebody is not going to pay with margin left for expenses for what you're selling, there's no commercial viability. I always use the example of a VHS video machine. You could make it from Kevlar, diamond plated, there's no commercial viability. People don't want it anymore. You then need to create a profitable business. And profit is only there to feed growth. It's a universal law. So if a tree is not growing, it's slowly dying. If the king of the jungle, a lion, no longer grows, he's susceptible to new competition in the environment, and then he dies. And the business is the same. So we need to create multiple profitable transactions that we can use that money to reinvest and actually fund the growth. It then needs to be an enterprise. And I think when we're starting out in business, often we are the business. It's our baby. It's what we're good at doing. But we have to slowly transition that into being more an organization that then can consistently work. And you'll see why that consistently work is important. And then ultimately without me, because if I'm key to being at my business every day, then I don't really have a business. In fact, I've probably got a very stressful job. And if you look at the next slide, just briefly, I won't go into it in too much detail. Most of us start out even one level below this ladder. And we start out as a student or as a scholar or as somebody where we've learned something. Generally, we go into some form of employment, and we might, because of the unemployment scenario in our country at the moment, skip that step and go self-employment route. The danger with being self-employed is it's probably the worst job you could ever have, because when you're opening up in the morning, who's doing that? Well, that's self. Who's taking most of the stress? Well, that'll be self. Who's getting paid last? Well, that'll be self. So the next evolution of that is you employ people. Well, that's where a lot of young entrepreneurs struggle, but because they had to do everything themselves in the beginning, they probably can do it quicker, better, faster than other people. Because they don't have the surplus of profit or money, they try and do a lot of things that they're not good at, that doesn't really cost a lot in the bigger scheme of things, but they haven't got the money to go pay a bookkeeper or a professional or whatever the case may be. But we need to start managing people, which most entrepreneurs are not necessarily well skilled at. But then we need to get to, and this is where we start to prepare for technological advancements. We need to get the business to a point where we can do owners level work. And owners level work are things like planning, being creative and innovative, assessing the market trends and conditions that are coming at us, doing some research and learning and development, training our staff, all the typical things in our business that are not urgent. They're critically important, but because they're not urgent, we don't often get to them. And because we're so busy doing the work and delivering the product or delivering the service, we haven't got time to take a step back. And you have to get to that place where you can take a step back to be able to see the writing on the wall from a technological perspective. So probably one of the biggest public failures there was from a corporate company was Kodak. The company Kodak, that invented the camera, yet went out of business because they didn't foresee the changeover to where literally, everything we have camera-wise is now on our smartphone. And they didn't adapt. Why? Because they'd probably got good at managing other people. Ownership was now spread across multiple shareholders, and they went straight into that investor mindset of, well, what other business divisions can we invest in? What other businesses? What other products? And diversified to the point which was not necessarily bad, but the core of what they had, they didn't evolve into and see it coming. And therefore, they weren't taking that owner and entrepreneur kind of responsibility seriously, which is looking ahead, the foresight of things that will come and change as we go about it. Just to give you a brief overview of some of the areas that we would typically then look at in building that kind of business, if you go to the next slide, is starting first with a base, getting rid of the chaos, as it talks about there on the right-hand side, building a strong base of mastery. And that is where we're going, our money, our time, and the ability to deliver consistently. Once we've got the stability, we can focus on a niche, and I'm going to touch on that a little bit more, where we then develop cash flow. The surplus money that we can then put into other things. Once we've got cash, we can then put it into systems and get the systems to provide leverage. People must then run systems. And I think that's often where we make the mistake in an organization. We try and innovate through people rather than innovate through a system. We must put the system in place that must create the innovation, and the people must manage that accordingly. Otherwise, whilst we've got good people, we've got great innovation, and when they leave, we've got nothing. And then obviously get all the pieces of the pie to work together, and that gives us results. On the next slide, you'll see that there's two main areas of working on, and it's one, making profit, but also then doing the back office stuff and then getting these to interact together that allows the business to work. Now, if you look at there on the right-hand side, systems and tech is just one part of the overall pie that we need to focus on. But if we look at the next slide, this is the most important one when it comes to technology and bulletproofing your business. And I'd like you to write down for yourself, what do you think your uniqueness is? If I had a bag full of money that I wanted to buy from something from you, the product you deliver or the service you deliver, what do you think is your uniqueness? What differentiates you in the market that would want me as a potential client to spend money with? And I'd like you to write it down now and get some clarity around what that is. So put your name of your business at the top and just on a piece of paper write down, what is it that makes me and my business truly unique? Now, for some of you, that might be seemingly easy. For others, it might be quite difficult to put together. Now, the danger is, if that is the same, what you've written there, for what one of your competitors are doing, you are not unique. And often that's our danger. We think, well, I'm unique because I deliver really good service. Okay, so people in similar businesses to you, do they deliver bad service? Well, maybe you think so, but does the potential client know the difference? Unless the client knows the difference, that's not uniqueness. We'll say things like, well, my uniqueness is my people. Well, okay, so are the people not the strength in another business? And we need to find the way to package what is truly unique in our business, because that's what sets us apart in that technological space. So if you look at Uber, when they started out, two guys stuck in the rain outside the Eiffel Tower, trying to get a lift with a taxi, pouring with rain, and going, there needs to be a better way of doing this. So they innovated, they came up with uniqueness at that stage, a platform that would drive the ability to find a vehicle at any given time, put the ownership back in the client's hands. The danger with that is today Uber is not unique, and that's why they're struggling to make money, because they've had other competitors come along that do similar things. The very industry that they were disrupting, the taxi industry largely, got clever and put together their own ride-sharing apps. And in some of the more advanced developing world now today, you'll have a driver in a vehicle, private vehicle individual, and he'll have 3 or 4 different devices with 3 or 4 different platforms that with which he engages. So Uber have lost the ability to be unique in the industry, and therefore they can no longer charge a premium, and therefore at the moment they're battling to make money. If you don't have a uniqueness, price becomes the competitive edge. And somebody said to me a little while ago, well, I'm in the kind of beauty industry. I do a little bit of makeup and I do a little bit of hair, and nobody wants to pay. It's not an industry that provides a uniqueness whatsoever, and therefore we're very price sensitive with our consumers. Okay, one way of thinking. If you go and do some research, you'll see that Rihanna's stylist earns more than 350,000 Rand a week, travels around the world, has a very glamorous life, and all she does is does the hair and makeup for one individual. Because in that context, with that client, in that situation, she's created a unique selling proposition. Because there's a uniqueness there, there's a premium. If you look at some of the more high-tech businesses, a lot of the app stuff that are making money, Airbnb being one, because they've dominated the market so much, they've cornered a lot of different access. They've allowed a lot of competitors into the market, and they make a decent premium on the transaction. They've got a uniqueness. They're able to charge a premium for it because I, as a homeowner, want their platform, and therefore they can now spin that off into much faster, quicker growth. So you need to really go look at your business and say, well, how can I be unique? How can I take this to a client faster, quicker, cheaper, at a better service level than anybody else can. And therefore, that uniqueness that it translates into will ensure that I get a premium. And we often think that businesses like this don't really exist, because if you're in a true uniqueness, you don't compete on price whatsoever. And business owners will often say, "Oh, there's no such business." Okay. I always ask the question then to say, well, do you think Rolls-Royce competes on price? Is price important for a potential Rolls-Royce owner? And if I had to ask you, Peter, the question, what would you say? If I said Rolls-Royce price is a factor, would you say that that's true or not true?
Not at all.
Not at all.
Okay. So a lot of people say, oh, no, it's not at all. People don't care what a Rolls-Royce costs. In fact, I challenge a lot of you to say it is a factor, because for the Rolls-Royce owner, if it's too cheap, I don't want to buy it. It's the same as if I want to buy a Tag Heuer watch. If it's too cheap, I don't want it. People that buy Louis Vuitton luggage, if it's too cheap, I don't want it. So we create an environment where that perceived uniqueness, I want to pay more for it. And the minute that's available to everybody, then I don't want it anymore. Well, how do you create that in your business? Because that starts to bulletproof what you can do. And technology is just an enabler of this slide, because that's all that we've done in disruptive technology. We've created a uniqueness, and the technology gives us scale. It doesn't give us a business model on its own. It gives us the scale. And that's what you do. You come up with uniqueness first, and then you choose the platform to drive it. Go back to the Uber example. The USP was, I don't have to stand in the rain outside the Eiffel Tower. I've got the control to order a cab for me in my own hand. Brilliant. Now, how do I scale that? Well, I create an app, and I do marketing, and I do all the normal business stuff that goes with it. So you first come up with the uniqueness, and then you choose the avenue with which you then actually scale it. Because if we go to the next slide, you have to make the choice in business. And just because it's a technology business doesn't mean that this does not apply. So if you look at this slide here, you'll always have the early adopters that buy into companies that innovate. So Sony used to be really good at this. They would come up with new products. They created the compact disc. All of a sudden, everybody uses it. They created the DVD machine. They created Blu-ray. And they start getting into the market and then capitalize on everybody else coming later on. I myself paid almost 3,000 Rand for the first DVD players when they came out way back when. Sony, it was a Sony. I can now go buy Sony at Game or at Macro or Takealot for 199 Rand. So in the beginning, there's huge margin, but small volumes. Over a period, the margins become tiny, but you've got volumes. And if you look at the tech space, two companies play this role very differently. So on the left-hand side, on the innovation, you've got Apple. How many products do Apple sell? Phones, tablets, computers. They do iTunes, a bit of App Store, a little bit of accessories. You battle to come up with 10 key categories of products that they offer. If you take it on the other side, to the right-hand side, and you go to more the commodity side, and you look at a company like Samsung, which other than Huawei that's coming up now as the third competitor, is the main competitor in the smartphone space, you'll see that Samsung make thousands of products, from chips inside computers, hardware inside computers, through to the actual devices, and then appliances, and even earth-moving yellow equipment. Apple is worth 3 times what Samsung is. So they've chosen a different business model. The one offers more niche stuff, high margin stuff. The one offers more, let's target the market. Doesn't matter, but it's a choice you need to make, because if you don't make the choice, you'll be stuck in that uncomfortable middle, and often you'll be on the slippery slope. So when you're looking to design a business that can be successful, you need to choose, am I going to play in the low volume, high margin space? And then absolute uniqueness is critical. Or am I just going to be innovative and do this as wide as possible and take a tiny piece of a massive volume puzzle? Both are equally successful if it's by design. It's when it's by default and you're bouncing between them that you get stuck in the middle and then you don't kind of succeed at all. And especially in the South African context, so if we look at some things I picked up now recently, just around what our market looks like. So if you go to the next slide there, Peter, we must also understand, if you're based in South Africa, what are we dealing with? So we now have more cell phone users and smartphone users than countries like the Netherlands, countries like Sweden. Yet almost 2/3 of the devices sold in South Africa are under 1,500 Rand. In fact, if you go to the next slide, only 10% of devices sold are more than 6,000. Well, okay, depending on the context of your smartphone, you start looking at all the iPhones, not one of them is under 6,000 Rand. You look at all the premium smartphones of Samsung, not one under 6,000 Rand. All the premium Huawei products that we see as technological advancements, not one under 6,000 Rand. Yet 90% of the volume is sitting underneath where the high-tech guys are playing. Because those companies, Samsung and Huawei, have understood we need to lead with a high-tech product. That creates the brand impression. In fact, that probably pays the profit. But we go volume-based with some of the other product offerings because that's what the market can afford. And that's when your actual market that you play in becomes important. You can't just always have one route to market. And these cell phone stats, which we see as abnormal from what we're used to, because we see all the premium branding stuff for the high end of the market, yet 90% of the market is not selling those devices. It's selling something else. And then we need to look at saying, well, why are we trying to do this in the first place? If you go to the next slide, he died a few years ago. He was known as America's foremost business philosopher. But a business and the journey that we go on is simple. To become financially independent, which is why we're in business in the first place, is you must turn income into capital. And then again, think of when you were employed, going into the self-employed route, you took a salary, turned it into starting a business. Income into capital. Profit that we make on a sale to reinvesting into the business. You need to take that capital and turn it into enterprise, a business, an organization, a structure that can now deliver consistent profit, which we can take a portion and reinvest into business, a portion into invest into other things, and that becomes our financial independence. So this is as applicable for a product or service. How do you take the effort that you put in or the product that you want to sell, and how do you create the income? How do you sell something to get a surplus to get more capital together? So that capital we can turn into business. Once we can do that consistently, we generate profit, which we then take out or reinvest, and that becomes our financial independence. So it's as applicable at the higher level of what a business is versus even into individual products or services that we might create. So when we look at bulletproofing our business, you cannot get to that level of thinking, that level of preparation, that level of looking into the future, seeing what people are doing around you, unless you've actually got the time. And how do you create the time? You need people. It's still the best leverage in a business that we have. How do you get people? You need to create a profitable transaction. So the grind you might be going through if you've got a smaller business is so that you can get the right people on board, give them the right level of training and support so you can have thinking time. If you've got an existing strong business and it's chaos at the moment, how do you put aside thinking time? And it does, dare I say, screw with an entrepreneur's head a little bit, because we're wired to feel we're valuable when we're doing stuff. Yet humans are human beings, not human doings. So what we need to spend time on is saying, how do I take a step back as the leader of this organization? And how do I look into the future? How do I go to courses or workshops or seminars or trade shows? How do I research what's happening internationally? How do I see what's happening in other industries that might happen in mine? And a really interesting debate a little while ago with actually the wife, the husband was there too, but the wife of a neurosurgeon. And according to her, our definition of a business would never work for them. Commercial, profitable business that works without you was never going to be the case for a neurosurgeon, because in their opinion, and they're not far wrong, neurosurgeons almost at the top end of the medical profession. They have that speciality to operate and to diagnose the brain, which is obviously a very important organ for us. But if you take it a couple of levels down in the medical profession and you see, but disruption is happening in that industry. Where do most of the pharmacists that come out of university today work? Clicks, ShopRite, Dis-Chem. Where do most of the dietitians work today? Places like Discovery, Momentum. Where do nurses and pathologists work today? Insurance companies drive around collecting blood and samples going back and forth. Pathologists might work in an organized big corporate that now runs all the blood labs in hospitals. So even in the medical industry, we're seeing disruption coming all the time, yet some of the more specialized fields are saying, won't happen to us. And if you think that change won't happen to you,
We seem to have lost. Hi, sorry, we seem to have lost Harry there. There we go.
Sorry, Peter, it looks like I temporarily got lost.
No worries at all.
Okay, good old technology. So all industries will be disrupted. And you can, with a little bit of time and a little bit of research, YouTube and Google is our friends, you can see where that's starting to happen for you. And the only way you will bulletproof the business is if you foresee it, if you're one step ahead of it, if it's by design that you're putting it into your business. Because if you're caught unaware, if you're trying to play catch up, it will be the beginning of an end. And that's the reality. So you need to take back control of your business. You need to see this as where it's going. You need to seriously commit to the future and not stop worrying about what is happening around you. And then go build a business that caters for the now, but also for the future. And know that if it's going in the right direction, you will have to take it apart, break it up, add to it, change it, tweak it, innovate, evolve, all the time to get to a place of success. So maybe a good place there for any questions or any comments that we have either from your side, Peter, or for anybody else.
I think, first of all, I just want to thank you for this. Is extremely insightful, and especially the approach you took regarding this, specifically saying it's not necessarily the technology, it's more just the basic fundamentals that we need to actually get right. And that's something I think we tend to forget. And thank you for that. That's really extremely, extremely insightful.
A good example of that, just to interrupt you there, recently one of our coaches was involved in a panel reviewing some enterprise development companies. And it was sponsored by an ICT-related company. And they want a lot of the enterprise development to be focused on ICT and this whole topic we're talking about, digital disruption. And the woman that was pitching, she herself builds, manufactures, services and repairs trailers and rents them out in a township environment. And because we're so gung-ho on technology, the slant was, well, maybe we must help create an app that can allow people to book these trailers on their phones, and that'll be a lot easier. Well, before we go to the technology, let's first look at the business model and look at getting that right first, and then we choose the technology that's going to go after it. Because a lot of the technology that we have today didn't exist 10 years ago. The technology only enables the business idea. It doesn't create the business idea.
Thanks for that, Harry. I see we've got a question here from Sean. He asks you, how does one establish a disruptive awareness strategy and evaluate the investment potential in the face of technological changes?
Sure, great question, Sean. Would be a nice
that is a goodie.
question in a university because quite broad. I think again, and that's what we do every day. Is let's rather make it simple. So start with the first part of that question. How do you establish a disruptive awareness strategy? So the first thing is the word there, awareness. You need to have an awareness that this is important. So the awareness on my own is no use to the company at all. I need to create that awareness in my team and my staff, and potentially even in my clients. So when we're looking for answers, don't always just look in the mirror for yourself. Go to your team, ask them the question, and go to your clients, because they often have a wealth of information that could be beneficial to business. If you look at it back to your USP, you might not know why people do business with you, or you might think it's one thing. Well, go ask your clients, and they'll come up with what they like about your business. So ask the clients how they like to work, what would be beneficial for them, what would be quicker, what would be easier, what would have them do more business. And to get to that part where you start to have a strategy is to create time. Well, do we once a month on a Friday afternoon have a brainstorming idea or brainstorming session? Do we use that Friday once a month to unpack what our competitors are doing? Do we use that strategy session once a month to review competitive businesses and what are they doing that's evolving technologically that we might be able to apply to our business? So it's first creating the space to have the discussion and then getting multiple inputs. So that's the first one. The second part of the question, that to evaluate the investment potential in the face of those changes, is yes, all of these things come at a cost. And what one needs to look at is the investment cost, the upfront cost. Often some of these have got an ongoing cost, but the time frame. So your payback will come on two fronts. It'll come on increased business, and that's often why we're wanting to evolve, is we want increased business. It will also come as time or cost saving. And we need to evaluate both almost streams to get the ultimate payback period. So no use just looking at what it's going to save me in time and money, because that helps nothing if I'm not going to get more business. The theory says if I save time and money doing what I'm doing at the moment, I can have more time to go find more business and then it will work. Well, let's actually unpack that. Let's unpack what we can get more business of and what we can save in time and money, and use the combined focus to see what the payback period would be. Also understanding that you can't have payback periods of things like 10 years, because before that pays back, the technology will be disrupted again, or you would have had to tweak again and do another investment. So you want to look at reasonable time frames, which probably you should be looking at like 3 to 5 years. If anything is going to take longer than 3 to 5 years to kind of pay off, then you probably need to go back to the drawing board and evaluate either that technology or where you can scale the savings in time and money, or scale the growth. Because before the end of 3 to 5 years, you're going to have to have done it again, and then you're never going to get the payback.
Sean, I hope that answers your question. And thanks, Harry. That's very relevant answer to that. Any more questions? Yeah, Sean is happy with your answer there. Thank you so much, Harry. And just if anybody wants to answer any more questions, you're welcome. I just want to briefly ask you to look on the screen there. If anybody wants to make contact with Harry, kindly see on the screen there the website, www.actioncoach.co.za, as well as the email address. It's southafrica@actioncoach.com. and please make contact with him. As we've just witnessed now, he's extremely knowledgeable, and we really appreciate your time and effort to do this for us. Thank you very much, Harry.
No, you're welcome. And for everybody else, the nice thing about our business too is we have a team now of 45 coaches around the country. So if you go to the website, you'll be able to locate where they are. Go to the events section of the website too. We often do complimentary events because, yes, we're doing them to try and bring on more clients, but we're also doing this because we see business as the vehicle to solve a lot of South Africa's challenges and issues. So we want more successful, more sustainable businesses, and those workshops will be great to get a deeper understanding of how to build your business. I was just thinking about Sean's question that he asked just now too, and a good place to start when you're thinking technology disruption is look at the businesses that inspire you. Look at the businesses that you thought, geez, that's quite clever. I never thought of that. Or I like using their app. I like using their solution. Because that gives you a focused point to say, okay, let me go and pack what it is that they did. How did they do it? How did they start? How are they marketing this? Because if you look at even apps today, by far the majority of apps will never make any money. They're there, they've cost money to design, but they won't make any money. So it's one thing to have the idea, it's a whole different thing to commercialize it. So pick companies that you know and understand. Because if you can unpack their strategy that you like, you've seen them do it really well, you can start to say, okay, how do I benchmark myself in my business? How can I apply some of the similar things? And then use that as an opportunity to scale your business, whatever that may be.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Harry. And just for everybody, this webinar will be available on our website, www.cbn.co.za to view. Please join us for our next webinar, where we will be looking at unpacking the 2019 budget that we just had. So we'll have a few experts come in and explain the impact on SMEs from both tax and legislative point of view. So please feel free to join us for that. And again, to Harry, and thank you so much, and we appreciate your time again.
Yeah, pleasure. It's been great to be spending the time with you and to be sharing a little bit. I hope it's valuable for everybody. If you just put up the last slide there, just as the closing thought, bit of tongue-in-cheek with Yoda from Star Wars up there, but it's why our business is called Action Coach. And always used to joke and say it's not called When Jacob Zuma Leaves Coach, because that happened and it changed nothing for most of your realities. It's do or do not, but there is no try. It's the actions you take. It's not thinking about the disruption that could come my way. It's actually taking the time out to do something about it. Do it. Don't try. Don't not do it. Implement it. Because businesses generally succeed because they've made mistakes and they've learned from them and they've gone forward. Businesses often fail because we haven't made mistakes. We've been pondering. We've been sitting on decisions. We've been thinking about it, but we didn't actually get to doing anything about it. So I'd like to leave that as a passing thought, is do something with what you've heard here today. Otherwise, it would have been great, a bit of information, wouldn't really have added value to you and your business. And other than that, thanks for joining. I hope it's added impact and run a more successful, sustainable business, please. We all need you to do it. Thanks.
Thank you, Harry. Cheers. Thank you, everybody. Bye.